Well, hello everyone. Welcome to the Xcode Survival Guide. So my name is Kristina Fox. I'm a senior iOS engineer at Intuit. If you're not familiar with the company, we're makers of TurboTax, so get your taxes done. It's that season. I also work on an application called QuickBooks Self-Employed, which is primarily aimed at freelancers and contractors. So if you're one of those, come talk to me afterwards and I can hook you up with a free discount. Okay, so enough about me and my company. Let's talk about Xcode. So I'm going to start us off, set the stage a little bit with a little story, and I want you all to participate with me. So imagine, instead of coming to TechieCon today, you ended up actually waking up in an unfamiliar room. You've never been here before. You look around and it's super quiet. The walls around you are stark white and it doesn't seem like anyone else is around. You call out hoping, well, maybe someone is there, but nobody answers. You kind of check your body and everything. You don't remember getting hurt or getting sick, so it doesn't seem like you're at a hospital or anything. You look around the room and you notice that there's a door on the other end, but then something else catches your eye. Close to your bed, there's a desk with a computer on it, with a chair right in front of that. You decide to get up and check your surroundings, but then when you step 1 foot down, you end up feeling some sort of squishy goo underneath your shoe. You end up looking down at the floor, and it looks like it's covered in some sort of shiny stuff. Almost looks like tree sap. You sit back down on your bed and try to pull your shoe out of that goo, but it won't budge. It's really stuck in there. You don't really know what to do. Well, luckily, you just got your shoe stuck, so you're able to pull your foot out of your shoe, but it doesn't look like that shoe is going anywhere. You decide to sit back down on your bed and reassess the situation. Well, okay, now you've got it. You decide to climb up onto the bed and then make a short leap over to the chair, and you stick the landing. Now, since the door is on the other side of the room, there's no way you'll be able to get to it without getting fully stuck in that goo. And unfortunately, you only have one extra shoe left, so there's no way that you can kind of remove clothing as you go over to that other door. Well, okay, you still have this computer though, and hopefully it's connected to the internet. So you decide to sit down and wake it up, and there is a familiar icon staring back at you. Now, clearly, none of this actually happened to you because you're all sitting here with me today, but it did happen to another iOS developer that I know. We'll call him Pete, and I want to tell you all about Pete's very strange day. So back to where we left off with the computer. Now, seeing that the computer, after all, has no internet connection, Pete decides to open up Xcode, and he ends up seeing a recent project file on there called resin. He decides to open it and start running the app. Oh, the simulator pops up, and it shows a pretty hideous interface, showing, looks like 3 different buttons. Well, Pete decides he doesn't really have anything to lose, so he ends up trying all the buttons. He clicks on rinse, nothing happens. He clicks on dry and feels heat and air start blowing around the room. And then he taps on stick and he hears a squelching noise. He looks back at the shoe that he had left stuck in the goo, and he realizes that that goo has kind of risen up around the shoe a little bit more. It seems like that sticky goo on the floor has gotten even thicker, which is kind of the opposite of what he wants. Okay, so it looks like the app seems to affect the state of the room. Stick clearly outputs more of that goo. The rinse button probably is supposed to wash away that goo, and the dry button dries the floor after it's been rinsed off. So clearly here, the task is to fix the broken rinse button and so that you can get out of here. Well, what to do first? Well, since Pete is a good and decent iOS developer, the first thing that he wants to do is go back and fix this horrible, horrible looking interface. Okay, so at the very beginning, he decides the first thing he can do, at the very least, is to change all that text color to white, so it's at least somewhat readable. Now, during this process, he ends up noticing that there are actually a few custom named colors there on the right sidebar. And it looks like they're supposed to correspond to the buttons themselves. So you see dry button blue, rinse button green, and stick button dark green. He decides, well, okay, anything is better than what's already on the screen, so he'll go ahead and stick to whatever colors they've already chosen. Oh, that is so much better. Well, not really, the background is still hideous, but we can go fix that. Now, since there was no named color for the background, Pete decides that he's going to follow that same convention by saving a new background color as a named color. Now, you can do this by heading over to the Assets folder, which was originally mostly used for images, but nowadays it can be used for a bunch of different resources, including new colors in Xcode 8. So he goes and clicks on that little plus button down on the bottom left-hand corner, and he's able to choose Add New Color Set from there. Not only is this responsible engineering, but say if his captors ever wanted to expand this app, they'll be able to use the same colors really easily. Okay, that at least doesn't hurt the eyes anymore. Now, this is great for apps that have more defined color palettes and for not having to deal with your hex values all the time. Now, after admiring Pete's handiwork for just a little bit, he decides that he doesn't really want anyone else messing with his beautiful colors and decides to go back and lock all the elements on the storyboard. You can do this by clicking on the Identity Inspector. So on the top right-hand corner of the sidebar, you'll see the Identity Inspector highlighted in blue. And then if you look for lock, you'll see that most of the elements are set to inherited nothing, which basically means that it's inheriting no kind of locking mechanism for the interface. Now, if you go ahead and select all of the UI elements on your storyboard, you can actually lock them in place by changing that lock option to lock all properties. Now, the nice thing about this, aside from locking your colors, is that it also prevents anyone from accidentally moving a button or deleting a constraint. So now your storyboards are locked in place, and you won't have to worry about someone accidentally doing something they didn't mean to. All of a sudden, a countdown appears on Pete's screen, and it reads 20 minutes, 1959, 1958, 1957. And Pete realizes that he probably shouldn't have spent so much time on that interface. It kind of defeats the purpose of actually fixing the app. Well, on the plus side, since they've only given him 20 minutes left, it can't be too terrible of a bug if they expect him to solve it in that time. Well, even so, Pete decides he's going to pull out all of his fancy Xcode tricks to get things done in time. Now, seeing as Pete doesn't really know this code base very well, the thing that would help him out the most would be to see as much of the code as possible at once. Now, most of us probably know all about this split pane assistant editor mode. If not, you can click on the little Venn diagram icon at the top right corner so that you can see multiple files at once. But from there, did you know that you can have even more than that? So the default view is actually to have the main editor on the left-hand side and the rest of any additional assistant editors stacked here on the right-hand side. So this is a great way to be able to see a bunch of more files all at once, but it starts looking kind of bad once you start adding in more and more files. Here you can basically only read a couple of lines from each thing. So, yep, great, you can see a bunch of files all at once, but it's not so good when you're actually trying to read and understand longer files of code, especially if you have any massive view controllers in your project. Instead, what we can do is actually modify the Assistant Editor view mode. So if you end up heading over to View Assistant Editor, by default, Assistant Editors on right is checked, and that will do that stacking thing on the right-hand side. But if you go ahead and choose all editors stacked horizontally instead, then you'll actually be able to lay out all the editors side by side next to each other. Another important tip would be to use the Alt-Shift shortcut. What this allows you to do is choose the location where you want to set any particular file. So hold down Alt and Shift on your keyboard, and then use your left mouse click to choose whatever file you want from the left-hand sidebar. From there, a little window will pop up showing you where you want to, asking you where you want to place this file. So you can either choose the primary editor on the left, or the assistant editor in the where that star icon is, or if you decide to click on that plus button on the right-hand side, then you'll add an additional file to your right. So you'll be able to end up with something like this. So now you can lay out a bunch of different files all at once. Okay, awesome. Now we've got a better handle on that code base. Let's look into navigation now. So if you're not familiar, you can hold down the command key and click on a function header or a variable, and it will pop up this little menu of options that allows you to jump to definition or edit all in scope. A lot of useful things for you. And if you were familiar with this before, chances are you probably used this before Xcode 8. And you may remember that we were actually able to jump directly to the definition instead of having this step in between with this menu coming up. Now, if speed is the main idea, which for Pete it really is, since by now I think he might only have 10 minutes left to fix up all of the bugs in his code, then we may want to revert back to the pre-Xcode 8 style of command clicking so we can move around faster. So you can do this by heading into your Xcode settings and going to navigation. From there, you can find the option command click on code, which by default selects code structure, but then you can, if you change this to jump to definition, then you can hop straight to any definition that you want. Okay, cool. So one last trick up Pete's sleeve. Even using the mouse button will slow Pete down a little bit too much. So he decides that he wants to be able to look for any function headers really quickly. So you can do this by hitting the shortcut Control-6, and it will bring up that list of function, class, and extension headers. The cool thing about this technique is that once you've hit Control-6, you can immediately start typing and for what you want to search for. So say you have this massive view controller problem, don't worry about it. You can easily find that self-row index path function right away just by typing in this. Okay, sweet. Now that Pete's got all of his tricks deployed, he looks through the code and comes across 3 different files of interest. It doesn't really look like much is going on here, at least nothing different that would be affecting the rinse button and not any of the other ones. So let's click one step down. He ends up heading to that network file that was being called in all of them and notices something that's a little bit off. Do any of you see it? And now? Yeah. Turns out someone forgot to change out that endpoint URL for the rinse button. So Pete's probably been rinsing some other random dev testing room this whole time. Well, the way to fix this, the correct way to fix this, would probably be to head over into your project settings and define some environment variables that can be swapped out depending on your particular build. So this is great for if you have a ton of different builds like release, dev, alpha, betas, whatever your project is set up as. But unfortunately, it looks like that timer is down to just under 3 minutes now, so Pete decides to be lazy and end up changing that string from dev to prod and just call it a day. Pete goes ahead and runs the app again, clicks on the rinse button, and then watches a bunch of water come gushing in and sweep out all the goo. He ends up clicking the dry button after that's done and watches the water slowly disappear after the heat dries it all up. Oh, he made it. He goes to pick up his shoe that was stuck in the goo before and puts it back on and ends up hearing a chime from the computer where he sees this message. At this point, he's thinking to himself, wait, what? Are there more stages? Before he's got the chance to process this more, he hears a door unlock and looks over to the far end of the room and sees that the door is slightly ajar now. He peers into that next room and notices a couple of gas masks lying on the ground. Frowning, he goes to pick one up and suddenly hears a hissing noise. Pete notices some sort of smoke filling the air and immediately throws on that gas mask. Looking around again, he notices something that's very similar to that last room. Another desk and chair with a computer on it. Following a hunch, he sits down and jerks the mouse button. Yep, Xcode again. Looks like he has to do this whole thing over. Okay, so Pete builds and runs this project on the new computer, and it's a pretty similar concept to the previous room. Looks like he can use this app to gas or clear the room. He clicks on the clear gas button, and the app immediately crashes. He does it again. He runs the app, he builds and runs the app again, and toggles between the other two rooms, room 2 and 3, on that segmented control. And the same thing happens. Everything's just crashing. So he checks the console for Xcode and sees that, unfortunately, there's just not very much useful information there, aside from a log about an unknown exception being thrown. Great. Just what he wants to see when, there's a room full of deadly gas in the air. Well, if Pete had a device, one of his favorite tricks was actually to build the app to a device and check out the crash log from his device's logs if Xcode console is not telling him that much information. Sometimes this can point to the area that's having an issue, which is awesome. But unfortunately, in this case, he's only got himself and the simulator, so he won't be able to do it. Instead, Pete decides to do a catch-all and add a breakpoint to catch all the exceptions and see if that will lead him anywhere. And you can do this by heading over to the breakpoints tab on your left-hand sidebar and tapping that plus button. That will bring up a menu of a bunch of different breakpoint options that you can set. And in this case, we'll just be doing the exception breakpoint. After a bit of poking around, Pete ends up in this file, which looks like it's converting some JSON into a room object. Now, let's see what's wrong here. Can anyone spot this one? How about now? It looks to me like it's another silly typo. Man, the people that created this app are just terrible coders. Well, this time we're trying to decode the JSON string, but instead of decoding it to key name, they accidentally added an extra S to it. Now, luckily for whoever created this app, Pete is well-versed in the new Codable enhancement in Swift 4, and quickly decides to convert this class into a simple room struct and change the assessors accordingly. So now, it's pretty straightforward, and this particular thing will allow us to decode that JSON much easier, and it will get rid of the crash. Now, at this point, Pete is feeling a little cheeky and decides that he wants to leave a present for his captors. He wants to educate them on Codable by adding an autocomplete snippet that they can use in the future. So like using autocomplete for the Apple standard libraries and Swift syntax, there's a code snippet library that's found on the right-hand sidebar. And what you can do is you can also add your own custom snippets by highlighting the piece of code that you want, dragging that over the code snippet library, and then dropping it in. Now, what will happen then is this little window will pop up, and don't forget you want to fill out the title so you can identify your new snippet, but you also want to fill out that completion shortcut, because then you'll be able to use it in your code, just like this. So anytime Pete's captors now want to decode some more JSON objects, what they can do is just use this better NS coding shortcut and construct a codable struct from there. Pete ends up running the app again and clicks on the clear gas button for room 1. And here's a vacuuming sound, sucking all of the smoke from the room. Pete breathes out a sigh of relief and removes the gas mask. He hears another chime, this time coming from this computer. Second stage done. He hears another door creak open and groans. Oh man, not another one. Pete decides to step through the threshold and comes across a room full of applauding people. It turns out, at the end of the day, that there is a startup in San Francisco that decided to come up with a more creative way of interviewing candidates. And Pete inadvertently signed up to be one of them. Apparently, though, this whole thing wouldn't have done any damage. The gas was totally harmless and was just added for visual effect, and someone would have come to unstick him from that goo eventually. Needless to say, he got an offer because he flew through the whole thing, but he decided to pursue other opportunities since that startup seemed a little bit too hardcore for him. You know what the most unbelievable part is? This was totally based on a true story. Like, I guess competition for iOS developers has gotten really insane, so companies are starting to come up with interesting ways of trying to vet out the good ones from the bad ones. Just kidding. I definitely made up the whole thing. But I hope that you got the chance to learn some new Xcode tricks while living vicariously through Pete along the way. Now, in case this was a little bit of information overload for you, I came up with a couple of cheat sheets that you can use to quickly refer back to these items. And I'll make sure to upload these slides so you can check them out for yourself later on. A few of the resources that I wanted to call out, Paul Hudson has this amazing Swift knowledge base, and it turns out that there are a few Xcode tips and tricks in there, so I would highly recommend checking this out. And I'd also wanted to thank a lot of the Twitter iOS community, including those 3 names at the bottom. I ended up sending out a tweet asking for some feedback on a bunch of the cool tips and tricks that the community has come across, and I'd highly recommend checking out this thread to see a whole bunch more amazing tips that definitely make you a better and more efficient iOS developer. And that's it for me. Thank you. So I'm happy to take questions if anyone has any. We have a mic that's going to run out. Cool.
Hi.
Hi.
Do you have any solutions for code folding in Xcode 9? Because they totally changed how it works, and now it doesn't really work.
Yeah. Yeah, I came across that too, because there were a few methods that I wanted to hide when I was doing screenshots for this. Unfortunately, not at this point. It's probably just something that they broke and need to put back. One more here.
Hi. Thanks for those. What's the practical use case for locking the interface builder files?
For logging what?
For locking the interface builder files.
Okay. I would say primarily if you are not planning on changing that interface, that's the main reason why you'd want to lock those interface files. You can also lock certain elements in there if you only want to lock a certain portion of the interface itself. I primarily use it within my own projects just to keep myself from accidentally moving or deleting a constraint, because sometimes that happens and someone will check in that storyboard without realizing that they've changed something. So it's more meant to be a defense against any accidental movements from other people on the team.
Are there any things do you use in regular day development that didn't make it into this show? Any like shortcuts or tools? The logs, device logs, was pretty new to me because I get stuck on a lot of Cocoa stuff, so I don't get to look at the device. So I thought that was cool. But yeah, any other more things that you use frequently?
I'm trying to think. I can't remember the shortcut off the top of my head right now, but there's something that allows you to edit all of the variable names in scope. So you can highlight. What is it? Control Command E. Perfect. Thank you. It allows you to highlight all of the variable names in scope, so you don't have to run around finding and replacing everything. Yeah, that's one I can think of. Obviously, I actually had a bunch on simulator and on the simulator that I use too. There's one thing within iOS Simulator that allows you to slow down animations. So if you're doing any complex animations that you want to get perfectly right, you can slow down the transitions between those animations in the simulator so that you can make sure that anything that's moving around is doing it properly. That would be another one I could point out. Yeah. Okay. Well, one more.
Hi.
Hi.
So, as you play with Xcode a lot, so do you see some possibility I can have one storyboard on one monitor and code on another monitor like that I can play with?
Yeah, actually, if you double click on the left-hand sidebar for the file that you want, it will pull it up into a separate window that you can just drag over to your opposite screen. That's what I usually do if I want to have even more files up and I don't have enough width on one screen to be able to fit everything in the main window.
Another alternative to double clicking is to use Command T to open another tab, and then you can click and drag and tear the tab off into a new window, just like you can in Safari.
This might be seen as blasphemous with Xcode 9, but are there any third-party plugins? I don't use any, but have they lost their, what they used to have in previous versions of Xcode? I think Apple's been kind of closing that off a little bit. But are there any third-party plugins that you know of or anyone else uses?
Yeah, I did used to use Alcatraz in previous versions of Xcode, but it seemed like obviously every time there was a new Xcode upgrade, then it would break everything. I ended up just learning to live with what I had before, because Apple does continuously improve Xcode, and we'll take radars on any improvements that you want to see built into the product. So personally for me, I just thought it was too much of a hassle to use any third parties, but I'm sure other people here might have a different opinion. Cool. Yeah.
I forget what the function is properly called, but you can insert comments that match parameters and everything, Apple Doc style, in Xcode natively, where you used to have to go to third-party things for that. But every once in a while, it just doesn't work anymore. And the various tricks for fixing it are do this, do that, restart Xcode, reboot your computer. Does anybody have any insight on that one?
Can you repeat that question?
So Xcode will allow you to insert comments for a function you just wrote,
Right.
with params and all that. But it just stops working sometimes.
Yeah.
Okay, but no one has. I was wondering if you had a particular trick for fixing that, because it feels like we just do random stuff to get it to come back, and eventually it does, but we don't know why.
Yep. Yeah, I personally basically restart Xcode, restart my computer, and then it comes back. Yeah, I think that's what everybody else does. Yep.
I've seen that work one time. I had the wrong scheme selected, and so the file I was working on wasn't even included in the scheme. But oh, did you hear that? Oh, just making sure your scheme is also including that file that you're working on has fixed it for me. But I've also seen it not be fixed at all. So.
Yeah, it probably just ends up being a different circumstance for everyone, which is why you see all these different fixes for it. Okay, cool. Thank you so much.